Good morning. My name is Harold Melvin Abrahamson. I was born in Omaha, on north part of Omaha. The earliest house or home that I can remember was when we were living on Laurel Avenue, something around, I think 2500 Laurel Avenue, something like that. And one of my earliest memories that I still treasure was the fact that I was probably between 1 and 2, maybe 2.5 or so. They took me out to play with a wagon. I remember it's a wagon that you'd pedal with one foot on the ground and the other foot as curled up on top of the wagon. And I can remember my first thing, they put me in there, or I went in. I don't know whether I was put in or I went in. And I could barely reach the ground with my other foot to push myself along. And then all of a sudden I was magic. I grew up, evidently, because my leg got longer and I could push fairly easily with that leg. So as I got a little bit older, I think we were in around three years old or so, my sister Lucille and my brother Norman, they were in school. My brother Norman is 9 years older than I am. My sister Lucille is 5 older than I am. But they were going to school, and I think they were going to Druid Hill, if my memory sounds right. And they took me there, and I can remember I was very enthused because I got to ride in a little car. I wasn't able to go to school. I was just visiting there. I think I was barely 4. Not only then there was sort of a dropout period where my family moved, and the next I really remember was growing up a little bit in Council Bluffs, Iowa, is where we moved. And I was wanting to go to school there, and I remember my mother got me a special permit so that I could start school early at 4 rather than 5. So I was in school early at my 4-year-old level, but I couldn't read. I wasn't worth a damn reading. Not because I couldn't, but I think it was mostly because I wouldn't. Because I would remember getting on my mother's or dad's lap every night and reading the funnies, but I wouldn't read them. My folks would read them to me. And the fact that I didn't read well, I went through kindergarten, no problem. The fact that I didn't read well, they held me back in first grade till I could read. Well, now I had an incentive to really read, so I became a real reader, very, very avid reader, and I devoured books by the dozens from the school library. Went to Avenue B Grade School in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Went from there to my high school was TJ, and from there I went into Omaha and then graduated from Central. From Central I went into the Navy. In the Navy I came back and went to University of Omaha in 1946, I think I started. Graduated in 49. So that's about it now. As far as going back to grade school or going back to the earlier years, you got me talking, you're anyway, in grade school I was very interested, I was friends with my friends, got into Boy Scouts. I was in the Boy Scouts, got to be a Boy Scout leader over there. I was in troop number 2. We met at Thomas Jefferson High School, met in the, what they call it, it was a room behind, it was like a little auxiliary room, but there was a place where we would meet for Boy Scout meetings, I suppose it was. And let's see, what else? Boy Scout, I got to be a assistant troop leader and went to Boy Scout camp in Camp Cedars in Atlantic, Iowa. And then what else do we do in Council Bluffs? getting back to my Council Bluffs upbringing, like I said, I was in the Boy Scouts, and that was very important to me. I was in Boy Scout Troop Number 2, and the scout leader there was a real gentleman. He was a worker in the Council Bluffs post office. He was a sport. He never had any kids of his own, but he was sort of a father figure to all the Boy Scouts there. And we'd go over to his place. We'd check out pup tents, which are two-man tents. He'd set up. We'd check them out to stay overnight. And as I got a little bit older, I was assistant to the troop leader. And we went to, when I say I went to Boy Scout camp in Camp Cedars, I was a counselor over there. And as a counselor, we did a lot of stuff. And I was a pretty good swimmer. We went to, in growing up Council Bluffs, I spent all my summertime at Crystal Pool in Council Bluffs. It was on, I think, 5th Avenue. And we'd go over there and get a summer pass. And I don't know how we did it, but we'd collect our whole thing. I think it was a whole $2 or $3 for a summer pass. It might have been $5, I don't really remember. We'd go and I was a pretty good swimmer. And then we went to scout camp and I was a counselor. And I taught archery. I was the archery instructor there. And then when we weren't teaching archery, we were helping with the swimming pool, and I was a lifeguard. And one of my fondest memories was in the lifeguard pool, we would divide it up. Part of us would be on the shallow end of the pool, which shallow end was about 5 foot deep, thereabouts. And the deep end of the pool was, they could dive in and so forth, so it was 8, 9 feet, I suppose. Whatever. But one of my biggest memory was that I was a lifeguard, and there were other guys that were lifeguards, and they were on the other end of the pool. And I had a bunch of kids on my end of the pool, and one of them I could see was getting himself in trouble as far as staying afloat and so forth. So I was hollering at the guys at the other end of the pool, because it was clear on the other side, to get over there and give him a hand. Well, I hollered like crazy, but nobody heard me. So I finally decided to dive in, and I swam across as fast as I could, and I was a pretty good swimmer in those days. Swam across, and I picked him up, and I carried a lifeguard type to the side of the pool, and then they helped me get him out of the pool. And I was sort of the camp hero for a day. Scout camp, I not only was a counselor, but my main thing was archery. I was an archery instructor. And I checked out the archery. We would set up targets about 45, 50 yards away, and we'd do it. One of the main things we had, which was a lot of fun, we had archery golf. And they set out a archery course similar to a golf course, only instead of holes, we would have sandbags mounted on pegs about 200-300 yards apart. You'd go out and you'd shoot and see how many shots you could go around the course with. So we enjoyed that very much. And I not only did archery there in school, but in Council Bluffs I was very much of an archery. I had my own bow and arrows, and I got to be fairly decent. Never a real expert, but I was okay. I did okay on it. Anyway, we went back to school, went back to, we're talking about TJ. Didn't do much there. Really, I can't remember much. I think I made the honor society there, but for freshmen, that was nothing. It was a big deal. And then I remember in my freshman year, we still lived in, I'm trying to remember whether it was Avenue B or Avenue A. We lived in 4 different houses in Council Bluffs because, frankly, we didn't have any money, so we rented a house till they sold it out from under us, and then we had to move to another one. But anyway, we were living in the house, and I remember talking on the phone, and we got news that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor in 41 there. So we were still living in Council Bluffs in 41. And I was just a freshman in high school. So that upset me quite a bit, obviously. And then in that summer, we moved to Omaha. I forget the first house we lived in Omaha. I believe it was on 45th, about 15 or 1600 north, I forget where it was. But we lived there, and then I went, then we moved shortly thereafter. I remember we lived at 809 North 48th Avenue. And that's where from there I would take the streetcar or hook a ride with the Foxes who lived next door to us to high school at Central High. And I went down there and I got into, I was into mathematics a lot. Went 4 years in mathematics. And went to chemistry, which I wasn't really very good at, and physics and that sort of stuff that I liked. And I made the honor roll for most of my years. In fact, I think my standard report card was 3 A's and a B or a B plus. So wasn't too bad. Got in there and got into some of the Jewish stuff. Went to the J after school every day, you know. Got into AZA there, and what else? Eventually, I got to be Aleph Gadol AZA 1, so I enjoyed that. And what else did we do? Went over. Oh yeah, I got my famous story about ending the war. It's all my fault. I decided that I was graduating high school, and I did fairly, like I said, I did fairly well academically in high school, but I was coming up on my 18th birthday in April of 1945, so I got real conscientious and decided to enlist because I didn't want to be drafted into the dog sluggers. So I enlisted in the Navy in early April of 1945, and that's when the Germans heard that I had enlisted. So they quit. They quit when they heard I was enlisted. So I graduated high school. We went up to boot camp in where the hell was it? North of Chicago. What was the name of the boot camp? I can't remember. Anyway, I was in boot camp, and I was in the Jewish choir, and went to Jewish services and so forth. And we were at out in the academic fields. I can remember we were supposed to graduate and get out of boot camp on August the 22nd. And we were in the yard in boot camp. Big thing, and saw airplanes fly over, and it seemed like he made a big V in the sky. And we heard then that the Japanese had surrendered. When they heard I was going to get out of boot camp, they couldn't take it anymore, so they decided to give up. So that was it. And from boot camp, I was shipped directly out to San Diego, California, in the Navy. I was sent out there as part of the, I was supposed to be a medic, which I didn't know at the time, but I would have ended up as a Marine Corps medic if I'd have gone on. But the war ended, so they canceled a bunch of us guys. So I ended up not boot camp, but in the Navy yard out there, and I was driving or piloting a small landing craft boat for men that were coming back on board ship. And the ships were so crowded that they had to anchor out in the middle of the San Diego harbor. And we would go out with our small boats to tie up alongside the ship, and the boat would fill it. We went training at San Diego quite a while before we did this, and learned how to handle boats. They were LCVPs, landing craft vehicle personnel, and landing craft mechanized LCMs, and was one or two others. Anyway, I was driving the LCVP, which was about a 40-foot boat with a 225 horsepower grain marine diesel in it. Had a crew of two, and I was the pilot. I was the wheel. I had an engineer and a crewman type guy that would tie up the boat. So we'd pull up alongside the ship once I got out of that school, and we'd load up with 35, 40 guys that were coming home. They wanted to get into San Diego and go on Liberty. We'd go in, we'd drop them off at the Navy landing craft place. And then we'd go back out to our ship and wait till we got another call to get them. Either go into shore to pick them up and bring them back out to the ship, or bring another party back into shore. So that we would be standby crew on these ships that came in, and we would be temporary for, say it was either almost every kind, destroyers, merchant marine, small aircraft carriers. I was on each one of these for a matter of a week or two at a time until they went away. And then I'd get transferred back to the base and then go back out to another one. And I was on everything. I was even on a battleship. I was on the Missouri and I never got onto the Iowa, but I saw it in the harbor next to us. So I'm remembering stuff I never thought I would remember. And then after we were there for a while, we got transferred up to San Francisco. Our Navy unit went up there, an LCU unit. I forget, I think it was LCU 1 or LCU 2, whatever it was. We were stationed on Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay, which was on the island between where the Bay Bridge was a stopping point or an intermediate point. So I was on there. I remember being on the bay and going. We'd sleep there at night. We'd have our barracks and walk around. I remember one time I was walking. These memories pop in. But I was walking. Was this? I don't remember whether this was in San Diego or up into Treasure Island. But I was walking along, and there was a column of prisoners, PWs, prisoners of war, walking along. They were about 2 or 3 wide and about 30 or 40 long. So it was quite a big unit. They'd have Marine guards on either side of them. So I was walking, and I walked alongside. I was pulled aside and said, "Don't you do that. You're not supposed to be next to these prisoners of war. They could be dangerous." So I learned my lesson. So anyway, back up in Treasure Island, when we'd go to chow, we had pretty decent food up there because it was all prisoners of war. We were all doing the chow work. They were doing the messes, the cooking and the cleanup and all that stuff because they were PWs, and we were sort of the big guys. We didn't have to do any of that work. So anyway, I was there for about 6-8 weeks, maybe a month or 2, and then we were transferred back down to Long Beach, California, and I ran ship-to-shore boats there for a while. Finally, the captains of our units what's the word I'm trying to, the guy that does the secretarial work and so forth for me anyway.
The radar O'Reillys.
Pretty much that anyway. The one that was for the captain of our unit was discharged because we were into the discharge. So he came out to the thing and said, "Who can type?" Well, I had taken typing in high school, so I raised my hand. I got promoted. I was a captain's assistant, and I was the only Jew. So I'd go in there and I would do the daily reports and that sort of stuff. So that was sort of an upgrade from my boat coxswain, being a coxswain on the boat. So I was there, and they knew I was Jewish, and about every third or fourth day, they'd come up to me, "Hey, Fox over here wants to be off for a Jewish holiday." I didn't know beans. "Oh, absolutely, he should be off for a Jewish holiday." So I was the Jewish guy's best friend in camp. So I was there for about 3 or 4 months, I think. And all the time I was in the Navy, I wanted, and I had my camera. I had a little Leica camera. I didn't know whether it was all right or not, so I had it taped to my ankle, so it wasn't very obvious. I taped, and then I went to the photography base on camp and did my developing. I developed which I did in high school. That was one of the things I forgot to mention that. Developed films and enlarged and so forth. I was a photography bug, and went over there and into there, and I was finally up for discharge. This was, I think, June or July. I was still in working in the lab, and they said, "Hey, we can get you transferred here, and you can be a promotion if you want to stay in the Navy. You can be a photographer." I said, "Thanks, but no thanks, guys. I'm getting out." So I think August, I forget what, August 6th, or I forget the date, but I was transferred out and got my discharge and went back on a train back to Omaha. Forgot to tell you about my adventure in the train going from boot camp up at Great Lakes out to San Diego. We were out there. We were on a train for about, this was just after the war ended. We were on a travel with a locomotive, a coal-fired locomotive. We were on it for about 3 days. Well, some of the coal got up into the smoke, but the rest of the coal-fire stuff got on us. We were filthy for 3 days on the train, because every time there was a stop, we'd stop. It was full of guys, and we didn't have berths or anything. We were sitting up in parlor cars. Anyway, that was the story there. Came back to Omaha. I'm skipping around in my, came back to Omaha, and this is the time where GI Bill was, so I found out about the GI Bill. As soon as I could, I signed up to go into the GI, under the GI Bill, to go to UNO, or it was, at that time it was just Omaha U. And I was in there, I was there for probably 3.5 years. I got credit for some college stuff from the university. I got my BA degree, and I was in the fraternity, Jewish fraternity there. I finally remembered that it was BTK, Beta Tau Kappa, was the Jewish fraternity. Jewish guys in there, I can't remember any of them, but they were all nice guys. We got along fine. We were in parades and that sort of stuff. But getting back to being stationed on board ships, one of the ships I was stationed, I think it was in Missouri, but it could have been another big battleship at that time. I was walking around at night. We had bunks assigned to us, but I wasn't always asleep because I was subject to call. They would just blow the bugle with our call, and we were supposed to go man our boats, which was interesting in itself. I'll get back to that in a minute. But I was walking around the deck, and I'm walking around, see those big 16-inch guns. And when they say 16-inch, that's how big the shell was. It was 16-inch, and the gun itself had walls this thick. And I'm walking. You could walk almost under the turret, and I'm walking close, and I hear somebody saying, "Hey, guy, who's calling?" And I look, and I walk under there's a opening, what they call it, I forget. Anyway, it was an opening where you could get into the gun turret from the bottom. And I poked my head up, the guy in there said, "Hey, you want an egg sandwich?" And the guy's in there sitting on a stool with a little hot plate beside him, and he had all that stuff. I said, sure, I want an egg sandwich. I got in there and he made me an egg sandwich, best egg sandwich I ever had in my life. So anyway, we enjoyed it. We talked for a little while, then I got back out and went around, and I was able to find, luckily, my bunking wasn't that complex. I knew I was down one deck and over three things. I was in room 65, 72, A, B, C, or whatever. I'm just guessing at the numbers, you know, I don't remember where they were. But there was bunks in there for about 16, 20 guys stacked about, 6 or 8 high. So sleeping in one of the bottom bunks when I could, most of the time. One thing I do want to tell you about getting out to our landing craft that we were going in on. When we were in the battleship, they were built relatively low to the water. So the yard arm that was sticking out that would tie our landing craft to when we weren't using them was out from the water, was maybe only 10 feet above the water. So what we would do, we would drive our landing craft up underneath the yard arm that was sticking out, grab a end of a tie-down rope, which is usually about 1.5, 2-inch line. My deck hand would grab it, it'd tie onto the front of the boat, and then we'd cut off the motor, and the landing craft would drift back. And then before it would drift back, I'd get up there and gun the motor enough so that my deck mate, my engineer, could crawl up the rope ladder, which on that one wasn't bad at all. It was only about 4 or 5 steps up. And then they could crawl across the yard arm into the ship. And I'd usually gun it enough so that I could shut off the engine and had enough time to get out and crawl up to the ladder too before my boat would drift back and be held by the line. So this was fine. This wasn't bad at all until we got attached to a troop carrier, which was a tall ship. So we'd go up there, and this was about 35, 40 feet above the water from where our thing was. So we'd go out on there, and if we could, we'd pull our landing craft up where we could get on it before it drifted away. But we couldn't always do it. Once in a while, I had a good crewman. He would slide down the rope that would tie the boat to the yard arm. When I say slide down, I'm talking about a 30, 40-foot slide down and over open ocean like this here. My boat was out here behind because the current would pull it back, and he would get in there, and then he'd either pull himself up with the rope that was tying the ship to the yard arm, or I forget how we got it, but anyway, he'd help us all back onto the ship. We'd untie it, start our motor before we untied, of course, and then go around to the other side of the ship to the gangway, which was down 35, 40 feet, where we'd load on 35, 40 sailors or visitors or whatever it was we were hauling that particular day. Interesting. Forget how scared you are when you're going down a rope with nothing but ocean below you. But we did it. We were brave enough without guts, without brains, I would say, not the guts, and no brains. Anyway, where was I? What was I talking about before? Yeah, after I graduated UNO, and my degree was in psychology. I got a psychologist, and I had a test. Before I graduated, one of the things I went out, I was testing kids in grade school. I got an agreement to test a bunch of kids in the Catholic school. It was on 28th and Leavenworth. I forget the name of the school. But I tested them and turned in the results, which they appreciated. But anyway, finally graduated. When I graduated, my brother and I had talked. He had a shoe store in Denison, Iowa, or in Audubon, Iowa. I shouldn't say Denison. He had a shoe store in Audubon. And I went out there, and he was contemplating, not only contemplating, he was advancing to have another store in Denison, Iowa. So I went out to Audubon with the intention I'd work with him until the one in Denison was ready, and I would go out and I would run that shoe store. So I was there in Audubon for about, incidentally, I was married, because I married before I actually got out of UNO or NU. But I was married, and we went out to Audubon, Helen and I, and then she went back into Omaha and she was pregnant. And I was in Audubon for 3 or 4 months, and then my oldest son she went back to Omaha, and Helen was pregnant, and she decided to go back and stay with her mother. And finally, they called me. I was teaching a photography class in Audubon at the time. I had 8 or 10 people, I think, teaching a photography class, and I got a phone call on November the 23rd, I think it was, that she was in labor and going to the hospital. I made it to Omaha, I think, in something like about a record. I was hoping a policeman would stop me so he could escort me, but I made it into Omaha, and I was with my wife just before he was born, and he was born on the 24th, and then we were okay. She stayed with her mother for a few weeks while the baby was still new, and then by then I moved. She stayed with her mother. I had moved to Denison to open my brother's store, his shoe store. And I stayed with, not Howard Ruback, one of the Ruback boys. He had a grocery store there, and he was a good friend of mine. And I think he was one of the members of the UN fraternity. Anyway, I was with him for about a month. Nice guy, let me stay with him. Whatever, gave me some free meals, and his wife was just as nice as he was. And I stayed with them until I moved my stuff into Denison, our family store, what little we had. I moved to, before we actually occupied a place where Helen could come, I moved 3 times there. Once was a house, another was an apartment, which for some reason, anyway, we ended up in an apartment over a garage. And I had a car by then. We used our wedding money, and I bought myself a Pontiac convertible. Who needs a Pontiac convertible? I needed a Pontiac convertible. But anyway, we had a Pontiac convertible, and then she finally came out and stayed with me in the apartment over the house. And Mark was just a baby. He was in a cradle, and he'd stay up at night, and I was still doing some photography work. So I remember I had the dark room set up in the kitchen, and we had the enlarger sitting over the bathtub. And I would do a little photography there. And so finally my brother's store was ready to open, and he opened, and I ran that for about 3 or 4 months, and it wasn't a great success. It wasn't any success. So finally we decided to sell it, and we sold it to a local guy there. All the shoe stores in that neck of the woods were actually departments in ladies' ready-to-wear stores, and that's what this one was. So we sold it, and I moved out. Went back, at that time we went back to Omaha. We moved out of the apartment, moved back to Omaha, and we stayed with Helen's mother and grandparents for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months. And I got a job with was the big transport, Watson Brothers. See, it comes to you after a while. Got a job with Watson Brothers. They were a big, big outfit. And my job with them was night dispatcher, which was just a fancy name for a bunch of guys that sat around and typed all the manifests and so forth. And my normal work week, as I recall, was about 88 hours, something like that. I'd work over 11 or 12 hours a night. I'd go to work I'd be to work around 8 at night and get off. If I was lucky, I'd get off by 8 or 9 the next morning. So it sounds like I couldn't work that many hours, but I did. And then I'd come home and be at Helen's mother's house, and I'd use the bed that they'd used all night. I'd sleep during the day. I was ready to go back to work at night. I'd go back to work at night. And finally, I got a little promotion in Watson Brothers. I was promoted to what they call the OS&D desk, which stands for over, short, and damaged. So we would trace merchandise that was either over on the manifest that was big shipped, or short or damaged, and we'd try and find homes for it or fix it or whatever it was. Now Watson Brothers, I don't know, probably a lot of people don't know it. I don't even know if they're still in business, but at that time they were one of the biggest trucking companies in the United States. They had big yellow, I guess more or less yellow vans, and they had something like, I forget, 500 or 600 of the vans that they'd hook up to their, or trailers that they'd hook up with their vans. So we would be on the over, short, and damaged desk every night, or every night for about an hour or two at long distance, talking to St. Louis and Kansas City and Sioux City, and they went all over. So we would try, well, I've got this extra here. Well, we were short that. That sounds like it could be ours. And then we'd deadhead, ship it to them, see if they could make it to the other guys we were talking to on the phone. So that lasted for quite a while. Correction, from working at Watson Brothers, I had a chance to go work for Aaron Fair and Son in Omaha. That was the company that Helen's mother worked for, and I went in as an assistant office guy, and we did calculations on shipments of scrap metal. He was a big scrap iron dealer, and we would ship carloads of iron scrap to the various steel mills throughout the country, and we'd do all those calculations and fill out the manifests and so forth, and that was complex, and I was working on a machine. From there, and I was also sort of the assistant in the actual production. They had not only that, but I went down to run their lead smelting company. When the guy that ran it went on vacation for 2 weeks, I filled in for him as the guy that ran the lead smelting. So I was with that I think I was with him for a year or more. I don't remember the exact time frame in there, but I had a chance at that time. They had people at Blue Star out of the blue. The owner of Blue Star was Helen's dad. So out of the blue, a guy came over and offered me to maybe go over there as assistant purchasing agent. So I did. I gave up the Blue Star, or the Aaron Fair, and went over to Blue Star. And I went. It was a good place, but Helen's father had a reputation of being a real tough cookie to work for. So I was with him, and I did fairly well. I was advancing, and I was assistant purchasing agent, and then almost purchasing agent, and got chewed out by Royal Chewer, this guy was, Dave Kaplan was probably one of the best chewers outer you have ever heard in your life. So this I took, and I was with him for, I think, a little over a year and so forth. Finally, one day I said, you know, I can't take it anymore. And I went into his office one afternoon, and I said, you know, Dave, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave you on, I quit, I wasn't fired. So I'm going to leave you while we're still on good terms. So we're not going to have any problems. Thank you. And here's my notice. I gave him a couple of weeks' notice, and I left. Then I was on my own, and I started tramping the streets looking for a job. And I did. Finally, I walked up and down downtown Omaha, went into the various, all kinds of different places looking for a job. Finally, I stopped in to a place called Hockenberg Fixture Company. It was small. Well, it wasn't too small. They had this was their Omaha office, and they had offices in Des Moines and in Iowa. What was it? Little, I forget. Anyway, they had Des Moines and over the east coast of Iowa, and then I went over and I got hired as assistant office manager. I worked for Bernie Hockenberg, and he treated me fairly well. I went in there, and he says, "Oh, you can do drawings?" I said, "Yeah, I'm an architect. I liked architecture." I did. So I ended up doing drawings of restaurants, planning out restaurants, of the layout of kitchens and counters and the front ends and so forth. And then when I didn't do that, I was on the floor selling merchandise and assisting in the office and doing general things. So it was I was officially sort of almost realistically assistant office manager. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I wasn't starving either. And about that time, we moved into, we were in an apartment. We moved into, I got money that we saved up enough to have a down payment on a nice little house. I can even remember this, the address 6509 North 33rd Street. This whole house was real expensive. It was a $9,000 house. And I think we had, I'm not sure about this, this could be wrong. It was either $3,000 or $1,000 anyway as a down payment. So we went in, and I'd get, I think our payments were $40 a month on the rent. And we did okay. I finished the basement, finished the floor, wall panels, the whole thing, and we did okay until I had a chance to, what was from there, well, I stayed with Hockenbergs
For a long time?
I was with them from about 1958, I think, 59, until about 61. And I finally I was thinking back of my old thing. I had a chance to go in partners with another guy into the photography business. So I went into the photography. I think I went back with Hockenbergs about 1961, and I stayed with them until 1966, I think it was, 66, 68. And then I went on my own as a consultant, food service equipment consultant, for about a year and a half, 2 years, 68, 69. And then right about in there, I got a guy that I used to work with came, and we started talking about whether I would like to go in with him and start another company. And we did.